What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to the Bimmer Barn. Today we have a special episode because we're going to be looking at my friend's E46 M3 that he just purchased, and we're going to be doing its first inspection and talking about the things you should look for when you're buying one of these beautiful timeless cars. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at this car and start figuring out what's wrong with it. Now we are going to be starting this inspection in a couple of stages as if you were just purchasing the car and you met someone and they were showing you the car for the first time. What you would really want to do is ask that they leave the car cold. That way when you start it for the first time, you can hear exactly what it sounds like. And you'll see that the car that we have here today is a black convertible. It's got the caramel interior and a 6-speed transmission. So none of that SMG BS. But you can see that the car is not in the best condition. It's not the best example of an E46 M3, but I think that's going to make it even more fun for us to take a look at. Now I have the keys here, so why don't we go ahead and unlock the car, pop the hood, and start the engine, and listen to what it sounds like. Now, bad sign number one is that we had to hook up a jump box to even get this thing started. And let's see. It does look like it's charging though, so we have a good alternator, 14 volts. So it's gonna charge up the battery while it's idling here. But anyways, let's go ahead and pull the car into the garage. That way we can get a closer look at it and maybe even get underneath the car and see what's going on there. But we're gonna slowly diagnose this thing and just see what is wrong with it, what the condition is, and talk about some of the common failure points on these cars. So now that we've got it in the garage, we can see a little bit better that this car is not in the best cosmetic condition. And you know, you really can't hide the fact that the invisible bra is coming off completely and there's a bungee strap holding something down. The car is covered in a ton of pollen. A little bit of these leaves are my fault because I've had the car outside a couple days, and that is why the battery was able to drain, I guess, in just a few days. But now we're going to go ahead and just start on the inside of the car because I think this car definitely has something very wrong with it, and one of our biggest concerns that we're going to have to worry about it. Because if you didn't notice, when we put the key in the ignition, for some reason we don't get any lights on the dashboard. We can't see what the mileage is. There's maybe some bulbs dead behind here, but the thing is, I don't think it's a bulb problem because the speed, the instrument cluster, the coolant level sensor, all these things, they don't work either. So we have a completely dead instrument cluster, it looks like, and probably other electrical issues. We just haven't discovered them yet. I do know that the radio works, the windows go up and down, that's good. I haven't tested the convertible roof yet, but we'll probably want to do that at some point. But man, this thing has some concerns for me. So what we'll probably want to do in this scenario is check the fuse box, see if there's any fuses that are pulled, as well as test all the ones that are in there and make sure that they all have a good continuity. Because without that, this car is very dangerous to drive. I mean, you can't see the temperature, the speed you're going, what RPMs you're at. But also, we don't even know how many miles are on this car. I think it's above 100,000. But let's see if we can take a look at the fuses first and see what's going on. And then we'll move on to what's under the hood, take a look at the engine, talk about what we need to look at there, and move from there. And really get into the details about the E46 M3 platform. Well, as you saw, the glove box was jammed shut. I had to get some pry tools in there enough to realistically get behind the glove box here. That's what you have to do, is you have to get these screws off, get behind the glove box, and manually press in these little things because it looks like the handle is broken. I think that there's some repair procedures where you can repair this without replacing it, but that's a common issue for E46s. So you'll find out really quickly. You know, be sure to test all the door handles and stuff on a car when you're buying one. But checking the fuses, you know, we didn't have any that were blown except for one, which was for the rear window defroster. It was supposed to be a 30 amp fuse, this orange one right here, and I think they mixed it up with the 69, and that's supposed to be a 5 amp there. So I blew the 5 amp because it was too much power for that circuit. But otherwise, the instrument cluster fuses, they all appear to be good. I checked them. I think it's like numbers 43, 34, and 10. But anyways, since those are all fine, you know, this instrument cluster, I think I've seen it before, but it might be a dead instrument cluster. So the next thing would be to pull the instrument cluster out and to check for power behind it. But at this point, you know, if you come across a car that you're looking to buy, that's a really good selling point to buy it for a good deal, because if the instrument cluster doesn't work, then you know, you're trusting a lot else about the car here. But we're going to go ahead and continue with our inspection and see what else we can find out about this car. Now, moving away from this electrical mess, which I'm sure we'll have to deal with later, let's go ahead and talk about this motor, because the S54, which is the native motor to the E46 M3, is quite unique and specific to the E46 platform when you compare it to like the M54, which is, you know, a 6-cylinder, but completely different than this motor here. So in regards to this motor, I would say there's probably 3 really important things that you should consider as far as, you know, how it's been serviced from the previous owner if you're considering buying this sort of car. Number 1 is going to be the vanos. You know, they do have seals in there that tend to fail, cause leaks, and then you'll get vanos codes. And also the exhaust sprocket, which goes into the camshafts. It's actually known for failing, and the tabs can break off. And if both tabs happen to break off, you'll get a, I think, retard or advanced timing position and vanos codes, and you know, could risk damaging the motor. So definitely want to service that before it fails. Something to look for. This motor does have manually adjusted valves, and I think it's recommended like between 10 to 20,000 miles you should do them. Now, you know, you can stretch that interval for sure. It's not going to change a lot between, you know, 10 to 20,000 miles, but it is worth checking, and it's not too difficult to pull off the valve cover. So that's something that you can easily do at home in a day, but it does require that you get the shim kit. Number 3 on this motor is going to be underneath, and that's going to be the rod bearings. Something that these S series motors from BMW Motorsport division, they're known for is the rod bearings failing prematurely. And I think that they just weren't designed to keep up to the highest mileage that we currently use them for, you know, us enthusiasts now 20 years later. So it's to be expected. You should probably change the S54 rod bearings below 100,000 miles. It's something you want to do preventatively, because if they do fail, you risk damaging the crank, and there's no coming back from that. You're gonna have to buy a brand new crank. Might as well do a brand new motor at that point. So what we're gonna do is let's go ahead and check this oil filter stand. You'll see that the S series motors, they have a fully aluminum, and it's going to take a 13 millimeter here. We can pull out the oil filter, inspect the condition, maybe get an idea of when the last time was that it was changed, and also look at the oil and maybe see if we have any metal flakes in there. So let's go ahead and check that out. All right, now looking in here, I don't see anything that really strikes me. Usually if there was, you know, like metal or something like that, you'd see like swirls. Now I haven't run the car in a couple days since, you know, I had to let the battery charge here. So it hasn't been recently circulated, but I don't see anything that really alarms me. Let's go ahead and take a look at the filter too. Well, a similar sight here, you know, a little bit of like a metallic maybe particle in there, but it's to be expected. I mean, it's a metal motor. I don't see anything that really strikes me again that says that it is, you know, has like failing rod bearings or something like that. But it is worth noting that if you wanted to check the oil, you can actually send like oil sample to Blackstone Oil Labs, and they'll test and see if like the parts per million of copper is normal, or, you know, above a certain limit, where they can kind of predict if your rod bearings are wearing abnormally. Now with the oil filter reinstalled, let's go ahead and put the car up on the quick jack so we can take a look underneath and talk about some of the common bushings and failure points on the chassis that you should also consider looking at if you're going to be buying one of these cars. And you can do that by getting a pre-purchase inspection, like, you know, a mechanic shop. They'd be able to put on a lift for you and inspect it, and maybe even give you the opportunity to go under the car yourself and check it out. But here we're lucky enough to have a set of jacks. You could also use just a normal jack, and that would get the car up on one side enough maybe just to get a good look underneath. But let's go ahead now and get this thing in the air and take a better look at it. All right, so taking a look under here, not surprised to see a pretty heavy oil pan leak. A little bit of fresh oil around here, but I think that's my fault from checking the oil filter a second ago. You'll see it just coats everything, the subframe, the oil pan, and all the way back to the transmission even. Now, something that's blatantly obvious is that the motor mounts are completely shot. You can see they're just about to fall apart here. The rubber is just so old. And that would kind of lead me to believe that a lot of the bushings are probably going to be similar as well. So like the front control arm bushings here. The control arms themselves, sometimes these joints, like around the outside and the inside one here, they can tend to wear down. So you'll probably want to grab a pry bar so that you can go ahead and just wiggle some things. And if you can make these bushings or like the wheel bearings or these ball joints here, if you can make them wiggle, then you know that they're shot and you know they need to be replaced. You'll see that this car has factory headers. Good thing to check on an E46. A lot of times people will install aftermarket headers, but you'd probably be able to tell just by the sound of it. These ones have the catalytic converters in them, so they restrict a little bit of power. A lot of times you can gain some horsepower by just removing them with, you know, like some aftermarket headers. Now, the other thing I think is important from the bottom side of the car is really inspecting the rear subframe. It's going to be different than non-M cars because it has to house this really big differential here. And so the differential bushing setup is kind of different. You have two small ones up here and then like a transverse one on the side of the subframe right here. And typically you'll see the front one fail first and the differential will knock itself forward and backwards. And you can test it pretty easily by putting a pry bar in here and just prying it like so, you know, up and down this motion. And if you can get the front of the differential here to move, then obviously the bushings have failed. The other thing that's really common on E46 M3s is going to be the subframe mounts failing and starting to crack. And it's a little difficult to check because you have to remove the subframe to check around the threads and such. But it's pretty common on these cars because being an M car, being tracked more aggressively. And I think that they had a factory defect in the floor of the chassis here, which caused it to be a little bit weaker. It was addressed in 2003. So 2003 and up, you know, cars, they should be reinforced from factory, but 2003 and below, you know, you might have an issue. So it's worth maybe checking the subframe, you know, if you own the car, if you're going to buy it. But this is one of the big things that if you're going to be selling an E46 M3, you're going to add a lot of value if you can confidently say that the chassis has been reinforced, because they offer kits that you can weld in. Plenty of people have done it, and it's a great solution to increasing the longevity of this entire chassis. So that's just something to consider there. Maybe ask the owner, have you checked the subframe? Do you know about this issue? This being a convertible, you know, it does have a little extra weight back here, so something could be of concern, you know, with the hydraulics and the metal and stuff. So I would definitely think that it'd be important to check this, you know, when you buy the car, maybe just for that peace of mind. When it is really bad though, you will be able to see the cracks emerging from where the subframe mounts to the chassis. And you know, if it's that bad, then you'll probably have some noises inside the car from it literally bouncing around. So this car doesn't look like it's gotten to that point yet, but anyways, I think that's just about everything from under the car that you should, you know, really focus on, some of the big heavy hitters. But now let's go ahead and move back into the inside. So the last thing I wanted to do was try to scan this car here. So let's go ahead and do a quick scan, and it should be able to find all the control modules that are communicating on this car. But I have a feeling that because the instrument cluster isn't working, that we're kind of having an issue with the OBD port here, because it's not reading the VIN on this scanner or like INPA or ISTA, stuff like that. So hopefully we'll be able to find some faults here that'll tell us what is going on with the car. And already I can tell that it looks like we're missing some modules.
Eventually.
So yeah, it looks like we have just 4 modules out of probably, like, it looks like 24 it can communicate with, but not all cars have all the modules. So we'll go ahead and take a look at the DME, and that one is showing us faults for timeout instrument cluster. And our ABS module is telling us no instrument cluster communication and a steering angle sensor problem. And our steering angle sensor is telling us slider fault, supply, probably from the battery dying, and the sensor vehicle allocation incorrect or not available. So I'm wondering if it needs to be maybe calibrated, or possibly it's a bad steering angle sensor. But if you were looking at an E46, it's really important to give it a scan and pay attention to some of the obvious things, like if you turn on the instrument cluster and the bulbs all don't light up and everything, turn on, then there's clearly a problem there. Even if we turn on the lights here, nothing happens on the instrument cluster, although they do work outside. So it tells me that, the general module is probably working. Some of these things are probably communicating well, but I think that because the instrument cluster isn't, it's separating the loop here, and we're not getting the full module experience on the car here. So we definitely have some diagnosing to do, but I think that that's going to conclude it for this video. So I hope that you enjoyed watching, and hopefully you learned something about the E46 M3 platform and the S54 from this video. Obviously, if you're purchasing an E46 M3, try to find one that's in a little bit better condition than this one today. But I hope you guys enjoyed having kind of a weird or more unique example to do a walk around and like a buyer's guide. So be sure to leave a like or a comment down below. If I missed anything, be sure to let me know your experiences with the E46 M3 platform, and subscribe to the channel if you're new and you haven't yet. As always, I hope everyone has an amazing day, and we will see you next time.